Brothers and sisters, I would like to make a friendly bet with you. You know, a friendly bet, non-monetary, non-pledge. Now here's the thing. I am so certain that I will win this bet. And not only that, in the process, I will make you extremely upset. Now, do you want to make the bet? So here's the bet. I bet you have never paid biblical tithes in your life. As a matter of fact, I can also bet that you don't truly know what a biblical tithe is. And you don't know how to pay tithes the proper way. The way it is written in the Bible. Not only that, I am also prepared to bet that you are one of the 99 people out of every 100 that is being or was being ripped off and robbed by those stupid, thieving pastors which are preaching today. Now, are you willing to take all of these bets, or do you want to take just one? Either way, let me show you exactly what I mean. But first, let me say, greetings and blessings, my brothers and sisters, children of Yahweh. Today, in this presentation, Module 7, we will be exploring the truth about biblical tithes and offerings, as per the Bible. And you will see why so many people have been misled when it comes to biblical tithes and offerings. Keep in mind, though, brothers and sisters, back in biblical days, tithes and offerings were based more on agricultural products. That is livestock, which is animals, like goat, lamb, and produce. So this is as opposed to today, where you are more accustomed to monetary tithes. A major reason for this is back then it was a simpler life, a time when people were more focused on the necessities of life, such as food, clothing, and shelter. And the Almighty expected everyone, while in the process of giving thanks and feeding themselves, to also help feed a certain group of people. Yes, you heard right. You were expected to have tithes and offerings to give thanks to the Creator and to feed yourself and only a certain group of people, not everyone who you consider to be poor. Let me repeat that again in another way. You were not expected to give tithes and offerings for every poor person. If you wanted to give to the poor, then give to the poor, but not with your tithes and offerings. You see, brothers and sisters, your tithes and offerings were for giving thanks to the Creator, to feed yourself, and to feed a certain group of people. Now follow along as I explain. So let us start by looking at what are considered tithes and offerings as per the Bible. Now if you look in Leviticus 23 verse 37 to 38, you see that there are mentions of various offerings that you should make to the Father at different times of the year. You know, during the Sabbaths and the different feasts, for example. Specifically, in verse 38, it states that these offerings should be made in addition to your gifts, your vows, and your free will offerings. Now, brothers and sisters, I would like you to keep two things in mind regarding Leviticus 23, verse 37 to 38. Firstly, the word vow is mentioned in verse 38 as an offering. Now, we will come back to this later. Secondly, there is no mention of the word tithe in either verse 37 or verse 38. Reason being, tithes are different from offerings. Now, we will also come back to this later. But right now, let us expand on offerings a bit more. So, looking in Leviticus 1 from verse 1 to verse 17, we see the Father giving instructions regarding burnt offerings. Now in verse 2, verse 10, and verse 14, we see that burnt offerings refers to what you call meat today, which is livestock. You know, cattle, sheep, goat, birds, for example. Then Leviticus 2 from verse 1 to 16 speaks of meat offerings. Now, as you can see in Leviticus 2 verse 4 and verse 14, in biblical days, meat offerings did not mean livestock. Meat offerings refers to vegetables, as we see in verse 14, and also to bake cakes and bread, as we see in verse 4. It's not livestock as we know it today. Going now to Leviticus 23 verse 13, we see mention of a drink offering, which is usually wine. And in some cases, the Bible specifically states that it should be strong wine. Anyways, just wanted to point that out. You see, brothers and sisters, the burnt offering, which is livestock, the meat offering, for example, vegetables, cakes, or bread, and the drink offering, which is wine, these are the three main things used when making an offering to the Almighty as per Leviticus 23 verse 37. So, when would you make these offerings? Well, there are many instances that are mentioned in the Bible. For example, Leviticus 3 verse 1 to 17 speaks of a peace offering, while Leviticus 4, 5, and 6 speaks about a sin offering. Furthermore, Leviticus 23 verse 38 speaks of other free will offerings that are usually made. At this time, however, we would like to touch on the mandated offerings which are mentioned in Numbers 28 and 29, which incidentally expands on the feast days and biblical holidays identified in Leviticus 23. Starting with the 2 daily offerings. Yes, 2 daily offerings. You see, Numbers 28 from verse 1 to 8 shows that twice per day, that is once in the morning and once in the evening, you are mandated to make an offering to the Almighty, and it tells you exactly what to give as offerings. So moving on to the Sabbaths. You see, Numbers 28 verse 9 to 10, it tells you exactly what to offer on the Sabbaths. So going further, Numbers 28 verse 11 to 15 shows what to offer on the new moons, while verse 16 to 25 shows what to offer during feasts of unleavened bread, and verse 26 to 31 shows what to present during the Feast of Weeks. Now, the Feast of Weeks is also called First Fruits or Feast of Harvest or Pentecost. Now, moving along, Numbers 29 verse 1 to 6, it shows offerings required during the Feast of Trumpets, while verse 7 to 11 shows what to give during during the Day of Atonement, and verse 12 to 40 shows what to give each day during the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, brothers and sisters, I would like you to please pay careful attention to what we're about to say. While going through the mandated offerings highlighted in Numbers 28 and 29, there are 4 things that you should notice standing out. Firstly, nothing was said about tithes in Numbers 28 and 29, not even on the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is mentioned from verse 9 to 10. Now, the reason for that is because tithes are different from offerings. Secondly, nothing was said about giving 10%, not even on the Sabbath. In fact, in verse 9 to 10, the Father tells you exactly what to give on the Sabbath, and there's no mention of giving 10%. As a matter of fact, as far as the mandated offerings in Numbers 28 and 29 are concerned, which includes the Sabbath mentioned in verse 9 to 10, when you look in Deuteronomy 16 verse 17, which is an expansion of Numbers 28 and 29, Deuteronomy 16 verse 17, it says, every man shall give as he is able. Yes, brothers and sisters, Deuteronomy 16 verse 16 to 17 went further to state that 3 times per year we shall appear before Yahweh, which is during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, which is also called Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And when we appear before the Father, we're to make sure that we are not empty-handed, but give as we are able. Again, our Father did not tell us to show up at any church every Sabbath or every Sunday and pay any 10% tithes. And I challenge any preacher or any pastor to show me that the Bible said we should give 10% tithes every Sabbath or every Sunday. Those preachers and pastors that tell you to give 10% tithes every Sabbath or every Sunday are a bunch of ignorant thieves. So moving right along and expanding on the Sabbath. The third thing you should notice standing out about the mandated offerings mentioned in Numbers 28 and 29 is in verse 9 to 10. On the Sabbath, we are told to offer 2 lambs for a burnt offering, some flour for a meat offering, and some drink offering. However, in Exodus 35 verse 3, we are told we should light no fire throughout our habitations on the Sabbath day. So how are we to offer the burnt offering and the meat offering on the Sabbath if we are not supposed to light any fire? Well, if you look in 1 Chronicles 23 verse 27 to 32, you will see that only the priests, which are the Levites, they are allowed to light fire to offer all burnt sacrifices that each one is able to give on the Sabbaths, the new moons, and all the said feast. So only the priests, only the Levites are supposed to light fire on the Sabbath. This means we are to congregate or come together, a holy convocation. See Leviticus 23 verse 4. So we're to come together and give thanks to Yahweh by giving our offerings to the Levites, which are the priests, the Levites. So give our offerings to them for them to light the fire and burn the offerings to Yahweh. Once more, brothers and sisters, there's no mention of giving any 10% tithes on the Sabbaths, as Sabbaths have to do with offerings, not tithes, and with offerings you should give as you are able. You see, brothers and sisters, the mandated offerings mentioned in Numbers 28 and 29 are what Yahweh calls the feast of the Creator, highlighted in Leviticus 23 verse 1. These are his feast, including the Sabbath. Numbers 28 and 29 tells you exactly what to give him on these feasts, including the Sabbath, while Deuteronomy 16 reinforces the importance of the feast, and in verse 17 it tells you, give as you are able. Now let us expand on Deuteronomy 16 verse 16, which talks about the 3 feasts, or the 3 times per year that we are to make sure we do not come before Yahweh empty-handed. Now remember, these are the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, which is also called Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. So in Numbers 28, verse 16 to 25, you see that during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you are to make an offering daily to Yahweh for 7 days. This means that for 7 days, you are to enjoy the Feast of Unleavened Bread, taking time off from work. Yes, brothers and sisters, not only are you to take time off from work during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but you are also required to travel away from your home to a place where the Father will tell you to go. Look in Deuteronomy 16 verse 5 to 6. You see the Father tell you, you may not sacrifice the Passover within any of your gates, but at a place where Yahweh shall choose to place his name. That means he's specifically telling you, do not keep the Passover at home. He will tell you where to go to keep the Passover. Similarly, in Numbers 29 verse 12 to 40, during the Feast of Tabernacles, we are told the offerings to give to Yahweh for another 7 days. Again, this means that for another 7 days, you are to enjoy the Feast of Tabernacles, also taking time off from work. Once more, in Deuteronomy 16 verse 13 to 15, as well as in Leviticus 23 verse 41 to 43, we see that we are to travel away from home during the Feast of Tabernacles, again to a place that the Father will tell us. And not only that, it specifically tells us that we shall dwell in booths during the Feast of Tabernacles. We see this in Leviticus 23 verse 42 to 43. On a side note, does this sound familiar? Yeah, the Father ensures that for 2 weeks during the year, we are to take a vacation from work, travel away from home, and enjoy the feast. Now, this is in addition to the other feast days that we are also given time off from work. So going back on track, the third feast mentioned in Deuteronomy 16 verse 16 is the Feast of Weeks, also called the Feast of Harvest or Pentecost. Now, while the Feast of Weeks is only one day, as you will see later, it bears a very important significance. Not only that, but as per Deuteronomy 16 verse 9 to 11, on this day also, the Feast of Weeks, we are expected to travel away from home. We see this in verse 11. It says, in a place where the Father has chosen to place his name. Yes, on this day also we are to travel. Now here's a very interesting point. In Deuteronomy 16 verse 11, as well as in verse 14, it states that you should enjoy the feast before Yahweh, you and your son, your daughter, your servants, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow that are among you. Brothers and sisters, this means your offerings are to be enjoyed by first and foremost Yahweh, the Creator, then by you, then by your immediate family, then your servants, then the Levites, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow that are among you. Yes, you heard right. Your feast offerings are not for everyone you think that is poor. Let's break this down. Yahweh, you and your immediate family and your servants are easy to identify. However, today it will be hard to identify the true Levites, which are the priests. While strangers back then meant people that are not from the 12 tribes of Israel. For example, the Egyptians. You see, in Deuteronomy 16 verse 12, we were strangers in Egypt. So strangers don't mean the person down the street or your long lost auntie. It means somebody that is not from the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, chances are you may not have any Levites or strangers among you. That leaves the fatherless and the widow. Now, these are also easy to identify along with Yahweh, you, your immediate family, and your servants. Don't you see, brothers and sisters? If you are not making your feast offerings, including your Sabbath offerings to the Creator and these specific sets of people, then you are not truly making any offerings. Chances are you are not even observing these feasts, much less to make offerings to the right sets of people. You are probably just wasting your money by giving to a set of thieves parading as pastors. If you have no Levites or strangers among you, why are you not giving some of your feast offerings to the fatherless and widows? Remember, you just have to give as you are able, and they are easy to identify and locate. It's easy to identify the fatherless and the widows. Let us now talk more about the Levites. And this will naturally expand more on the Feast of Weeks and tithing. So we can do this by moving on to the fourth thing you should notice standing out in Numbers 28 and 29. In Numbers 28 verse 1 to 8, we see we should be making offerings twice daily, once in the morning and once in the evening. We see this in verse 3 to 4. Now, why should we be making 2 offerings each day? Before we answer this question, let us go back to the vow offering mentioned earlier in Leviticus 23 verse 38. This will also lead into what a tithe is and what it means to tithe. Now, a perfect example of a vow is the one made by Jacob. Now, you know that Jacob his name was later changed to Israel. Now, in Genesis 28 verse 20 to 22, Jacob made a vow with Yahweh, asking the Creator to protect him, feed him, clothe him, and take him back to his earthly father's house. His earthly father was Isaac, as you know. He wanted Yahweh to take him back to Isaac's house peacefully And in return, he, Jacob, will give back 10% to Yahweh continually. So this vow and offer of 10% is not tithing. It is an example of expected fulfillment of vows made as mentioned in Leviticus 22 verse 18 and Leviticus 23 verse 38. You see, Jacob specifically offered 10%, but not all vows includes a 10% payback. For example, in 1 Samuel 1 verse 11, Hannah made a vow to Yahweh, asking the Father, Yahweh, to give her a son, and in return she will turn her son over to the Father to serve him all the days of her son's life. Also, no razor will come upon her son's head, meaning she will not cut his hair. This was a part of the vow. In Hannah's example, she vowed to offer her son to Yahweh. Not 10%. She did not offer 10%. She offered her son to become Yahweh's servant for the rest of his life. So let me ask you, brothers and sisters, have you ever made a vow to the Creator? Did you fulfill your vow? Have you ever had a sickness that you have been told there is no cure? Or have you ever been in such a tight or maybe even a life-threatening situation and you ask the Father to take you out of that said situation, and in return you will serve him for the rest of your life? Have you ever done this? Brothers and sisters, if this describes you, then you should start making things right and honor your vows. Our Creator, Yahweh, does not take vows lightly. So going back on topic, the vow in Jacob's case, the 10%, would usually be given in agricultural offerings. Remember, back then, most offerings surround agriculture, which is produce and livestock. And it is these vow offerings that are spoken about in Leviticus 22 verse 18 and Leviticus 23 verse 38. Once more, brothers and sisters, this 10% given continually by Jacob is not tithing. It is in fact a fulfillment of a vow. Do not get them both confused. Let us now expand on the Levites and talk about why we should give offerings twice daily. Brothers and sisters, if you look in Numbers 18 verse 1 to 7, you see that Yahweh, our Father, have taken the Levites and given them the charge of the tabernacle, thereby making them in charge of the priest's office and everything of the altar. Yes, brothers and sisters, the Levites are the priests and are to work for Yahweh only. In fact, in Numbers 18 verse 20, they are not even allowed to own any land. Well, isn't this interesting? The Levites, the priests, are not allowed to own anything, not even land. Then how on earth today we are witnessing so many wealthy pastors? I mean, some even own their own private jets. Is it possible that these pastors are not Levites? They're just imposters? I'm just wondering. So moving right back on topic. If the Levites are not to own any land, then how are they supposed to feed themselves? Remember, back then, agriculture was the main source of income and therefore food. Yes, brothers and sisters, this is why the rest of us are required to give offerings twice daily, as per Numbers 28 verse 1 to 8. Our daily offerings are to be given to the Levites to burn at the altar. Remember, Deuteronomy 16 verse 11 shows that your offerings are for, first and foremost, Yahweh, then you, your immediate family, your servants, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow among you within your gates. Yes, your daily offerings allow the Levites to eat twice daily. But what about clothing and shelter? How are the Levites supposed to get clothing and shelter? Well, this is where tithing comes into effect. Brothers and sisters, you see in Numbers 18 verse 21, the rest of us, which is the rest of the tribes of Israel, are to give 10% tithing to the Creator at a particular point in time. Now we'll come back to the timing of the tithes later. This 10% tithing that is to be given to Yahweh is to be handed over to the Levites as they hold the charge of the priesthood. We see this in Numbers 18 verse 22 to 23. Reason being, with the exception of the Levites, the children of Israel cannot come near the tabernacle or they will die. We see this in verse 22. The 10% tithes are to be given to the Levites for Yahweh, as the Levites do the service of the tabernacle and they have no earthly inheritance. We see this in verse 23. Now, when the Levites get the 10% from the rest of the tribes of Israel, as per Numbers 18 verse 26, the Levites are to take their portion of the tithes as their inheritance, and they, the Levites, are also required to give their own 10% tithing to Yahweh. Yes, the Levites are to also give the Almighty 10% of their portion of the 10% that they receive from the other tribes. Why do I keep saying their portion, the Levites' portion? Well, as we have shown in Deuteronomy 16 verse 11, offerings, and tithes for that matter, are to be made to our Father Yahweh first. Now, when we give that 10% to Yahweh, the Father takes a portion. Now, the Father's portion includes the firstlings, which is firstborn. We see this in Numbers 18 verse 17. It also includes the wave offerings. Now, the wave offerings is the best of produce and the best of the breast of livestock. We see this in verse 18. And he also takes the heave offerings, which is the best of produce and the best of the right shoulder of livestock. We see this in verse 18 as well. Now, as you can see in Numbers 18 verse 18 to 19, after we have given the Father our offerings and tithes, Yahweh then turn around and give the Levites the wave offerings and the heave offerings that we have given to Yahweh in the first place. However, as you see in verse 17, the firstlings are for Yahweh only. Yahweh does not share the firstlings. Now, going back to verse 26, we see that the Levites are also expected to offer 10% of the heave offering which Yahweh had turned over to them in the first place. So if the wave offerings and the heave offerings are first given to Yahweh, who then turn around and give them to the Levites, then what about the rest of the offerings? Who gets the rest? Brothers and sisters, the rest is given to you, your immediate family, your servants, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow among you within your gates, as per Deuteronomy 16 verse 11. So the same distribution pertaining to offerings also pertains to tithes. So what is the difference between offerings and tithes? Well, brothers and sisters, the differences are, firstly, offerings pertain to the feasts, including the Sabbaths. We see this in Numbers 28 and 29 and Leviticus 23. Secondly, with the feasts we are to give as outlined in Numbers 28 and 29. And if we can't afford that, we are to give as we are able. We see this in Deuteronomy 16 verse 17. Thirdly, and this is a major difference, with tithes we are to give 10% of our agricultural first harvest every 3 years, payable during the third year on the Feast of Weeks. Yes, you heard right. You only pay tithes every 3 years. No, you don't store up for 3 years and pay in the third year. You can't store produce for 3 years. The produce will spoil and rot. You pay once every 3 years during the Feast of Weeks, which is also called the Feast of Harvest, which is also called Pentecost. Let me prove it to you. Look in Deuteronomy 14 verse 28. It states that at the end of 3 years, you shall bring your tithes in the same year, the third year, while verse 29 shows who are to partake in your tithes. Now go to Deuteronomy 26 verse 12. It states that when you make your tithing in the third year, which is the year of tithing, again, which is the year of tithing, you shall give it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Yes, brothers and sisters, you only give tithes in the third year. Now go back to Deuteronomy 26 verse 1 to 4. It states that you should take the first fruits of your land and put it in a basket and go to the place where Yahweh have placed his name. You see this in verse 2. Now when you get there, you should go to the priest, which is the Levites. You go to the priest, give him the basket, and the priest shall put it on the altar. You see this in verse 3 to 4. Incidentally, brothers and sisters, I say, take it to him, the priest, to him. Because a woman is not supposed to be a pastor. A woman is not supposed to be a priest. Now, this is for another topic. I will expand on that in a different presentation. So let's go back on track. When are you to take your first fruits and take it to a place where the Creator has chosen to place his name? Yes, this is the Feast of Weeks. We see this in Deuteronomy 16, verse 9 to 11. So brothers and sisters, every 3 years, in the third year, when you do your harvest for that year, you are to take your harvest to your Feast of Weeks, which is also called Feast of Harvest or Pentecost. Now, when you take your harvest to your Feast of Weeks, make sure that in that year, the third year, you give 10% of your harvest as tithe. This 10% tithe applies only to the third year and is in addition to your regular offerings for the Feast of Weeks for that year. We see this in Numbers 28 verse 31. Hence, in the third year, you are expected to give your 10% tithes, plus have offerings in addition to the tithes. Remember, your offerings can be as you are able, as per Deuteronomy 16 verse 17. But your tithes must be at least 10%. For that year, your offerings must be in addition to your tithes. This additional amount, the additional 10% in year 3, gives an extra boost which further helps in the sustenance of the Levites. For example, clothing and shelter. How, you may ask, seeing that the tithes and offerings were mainly agriculture? Well, go back to Deuteronomy 14 verse 22 to 29. Look carefully in verse 24 to 26. It says, if the way that the Creator is telling you to go is too far to carry agriculture, then you shall turn your agriculture into money and walk with the money instead. So if you're far away, you are to walk with money equivalent to 10% tithes plus an additional amount of money for offering, since the 10% tithes will be turned over to the Levites. This is from your agricultural harvest, which basically is earnings. It's from the agricultural harvest you gather from the time of planting the year before, which is just before the Feast of Tabernacles, the 7th month, to the time of harvest, a few months after, which is the new year up to the Feast of Weeks. This covers a time period of roughly 9 months of earnings, and in some years it's 10 months. Yes, brothers and sisters, once every 3 years, everyone, excluding the Levites, Everyone from the rest of the tribes of Israel is to give 10% of roughly 9 months' earnings, and in some years it's 10 months. You're to give 10% of roughly 9 months' earnings to the Levites. The Levites are then to take their portion and give the rest to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. We see this in Deuteronomy 26, verse 13. So at this point, let us do a brief recap of offerings and tithes. Every day, you are to make 2 offerings, one in the morning and one in the evening. We see this in Numbers 28, verse 1 to 8. Also, every year, you are to attend the feasts outlined in Leviticus 23 and Numbers 28 to 29. This includes the Sabbaths, the new moons, and the Feast of Harvest, which is also Feast of Weeks or Pentecost. Now, on these feasts, you are also to give offerings outlined in Numbers 28 to 29. And if you can't afford to give what's outlined in Numbers 28 and 29, you should give as you are able, as per Deuteronomy 16, verse 17. Now, tithes are different from offerings. During the feast, every year you give offerings. You see this in Numbers 28 to 29. Now, you only give tithes of 10% once every 3 years, which amounts to 10% of 9 to 10 months' earnings. And this is in Deuteronomy 26, verse 12. They talk about the year of tithing. So when you give your 10% tithes to the Levites, the Levites, are supposed to take their portion out of what you give them, and in turn, they are to make their 10% tithes to Yahweh. They should then distribute the rest to certain groups of people. Now remember, tithes and offerings are not meant to be offered to every poor person you see fit. They are mandated by the Creator for a specific group, mainly Yahweh, you, your immediate family, your servants, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Now this should also explain why in Genesis 14, verse 20, as well as in Hebrews 7, verse 2, Abraham gave Melchizedek a tithe of 10% of which is Abraham's spoils of war. He did not continually give Melchizedek 10% each year. You see, brothers and sisters, Melchizedek was both a king and a priest. We see this in Genesis 14, verse 18, as well as in Hebrews 7, verse 1. Yes, he was a priest, even though he was not a Levite. He could not have been a Levite because he, Melchizedek, met with Abraham, and Abraham was the great-grandfather of Levi. At the time of their meeting, Levi was not even born. However, there's a significant reason to highlight Melchizedek as both a king and a priest. If you look in Psalms 110, verse 1, word for word, David said, "The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand." So what David was saying is that the Creator, the Father, Yahweh, said to the Son, Yahushai, our Savior, that Yahushai should sit at the Father's, which is Yahweh's right hand. Yes, David knew that Yahushai would be sent to save us in the future. Now in verse 4, David further said, Yahushai is a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Now what does this mean? So the answer to that question is this. Just as Melchizedek was considered a great king, Yahushai is a greater king. In fact, he's the King of Kings. We see this in Revelation 19, verse 16. And just like Melchizedek was a priest not born of the house of Levi, Yahushai is a greater priest. We see this in Hebrews 7, verse 15 to 28. Yahushua is a greater priest, also not born of the house of Levi. We see this in Hebrews 7, verse 14. So while Melchizedek was one of the greatest king and priests to ever live, he, Melchizedek, did not live forever because he died. However, our Savior, Yahweh, who is also both a king and a priest, just like Melchizedek, is much greater than Melchizedek. Not only is he greater, but he lives forever. He cannot die. We see this in Hebrews 7 verse 28. Since Melchizedek was a priest when he met and blessed Abraham, as per Genesis 14 verse 19, Abraham knew he was to pay 10% tithes from the spoils of war to the priests. Not only that, this mention in Genesis 14 verse 17 to 24 was an indication of what was to come later for the priesthood through the Levites, Abraham's great-grandchildren, and even later outside of the Levites through our Savior Yahweh, who stems from the tribe of Judah. We see this in Hebrews 7 verse 14. So brothers and sisters, do you now see what I see? You are only commanded to give 10% tithes every 3 years during Pentecost, which amounts to 10% of between 9 months or 10 months earnings in year 3. You can find additional proof of this in Amos 4 verse 4 to 5. It clearly says, "Children of Israel, bring your sacrifices every morning and your tithes after 3 years." You are to give offerings every day and every year during feast time, but only give as you are able. You see, if you can't give what is mandated, then you are to give what you can afford, and only to certain specific groups. Not every person you consider poor or deserving. Again, brothers and sisters, I have to ask, do you now see what I see? Tell me, are you truly paying tithes every 3 years and paying offerings on the feast days? Or are you just giving your money to a bunch of ignorant thieves parading as pastors every Sunday? Tell me further, these pastors that you are giving your money every Sunday, are they in turn making their offerings and tithes? Or are they just using your money to buy private jets, Portmobiles, Rolls Royce, Bentley, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Lexus motor cars? Did you know that these pastors that you're giving your money every Sunday or every Sabbath, did you know that they are not supposed to own any land, house, or other earthly possessions? Tell me, your tithes and offerings that you are giving away, are they being passed down back to you, the fatherless, widows, and others as mandated by Yahweh? If your answers to any of the above questions are no, then brothers and sisters, you have not, again I repeat, you have not been paying your tithes and offerings. My brothers and sisters, what you have been doing is building, supporting, and uplifting an evil scheme that is meant to destroy us all. So here's the $1 million question. If you are building, supporting, and uplifting an evil scheme and are therefore not truly paying your tithes and offerings, then why do you think you deserve to receive blessings from Yahweh, our Father and Creator? Answer me. Answer me. Why do you think you deserve to receive blessings from Yahweh, our Father and Creator, especially if you're not doing what He tells you to do? Answer me. When you pray and ask Him to give you something, why should He give it to you? Why should you receive blessings from Him when you're not doing what He tells you to do? Answer me. So what are you to do now? Now that you know the truth? Before I answer this question, let me touch on one more topic. It has been said over and over that your offerings and tithes are to be passed down to certain specific groups of people as mandated by Yahweh. Not everyone you consider to be poor. So does this mean you should not give to other poor people? No, brothers and sisters, that is not what it means. You see, by honoring the feast days and giving as mandated to the specific groups, You are in fact honoring the covenant made between you and Yahweh. Go to Deuteronomy 26 verse 1. It says, when you come into the land that Yahweh have given you as an inheritance, you should honor the covenant by giving as mandated in verse 2 to 14. Now from verse 15 to 19, you will see that if you do as commanded, Yahweh will bless you and your land and make you, which is us, the children of Israel, will make us his special people and put us high above all nations. Don't you see, brothers and sisters? These specific groups of people will be with you, among you, eating within your gates. You see this in Deuteronomy 26 verse 12. They will be with you in your inherited land, as per verse 1. A land flowing with milk and honey. You see this in verse 15. Yes, they will be following you, traveling with you and being with you on the feast in a place where the Father will place his name. Brothers and sisters, don't you see? These groups of people are special. You are special because you and these people will be keeping his commandments and honoring the covenant. Of course you are to give to the poor, but not all poor people will be among you. Not all poor people will be going to the feast in a place where the Father will place his name. Not all poor people will be honoring your covenant with Yahweh. So how and why should you give to these other poor people, you might ask? Well, one way the Bible tells you to give to the poor is found in Leviticus 23 verse 22. It says, when you are reaping your harvest on your land for the feast, do not cleanly reap everything. Leave the corners of the field for the poor and the stranger. Why do this? Well, just look in Proverbs 28 verse 27. It says, he that gives to the poor will not lack, but he that hideth his eyes shall have many a curse. Remember, brothers and sisters, he, Yahweh, made us all, and we were all ignorant at one point in time or another. We all have sinned and therefore have no right to be self-righteous. You see, brothers and sisters, you just might feed a poor person who changes his behavior, just like Saul. Go to Acts 9 verse 4. Now Saul changed his behavior into one of Yahushai's greatest apostle, who is now called Paul. Go to Acts 13 verse 9. Or you might end up feeding a stranger who, just like the Roman Cornelius that was mentioned in Acts 10, Cornelius the Roman, who is not an Israelite, he gets accepted into Yahweh's kingdom. Furthermore, brothers and sisters, we see in 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7 that Yahweh loves a cheerful giver. And Proverbs 11 verse 25 shows that a liberal soul will be made fat, and he that watereth shall also get water. Understand this, brothers and sisters. The more you give, the more you get. So what do you do now that you know the truth, especially in today's modern time? First and foremost, start by learning and keeping Yahweh's feasts mentioned in Leviticus 23 and Numbers 28 to 29. And no, brothers and sisters, Christmas is not one of his feasts. Easter is not one of his feasts. Rosh Hashanah is not one of his feasts. And Hanukkah is not one of his feasts. Go to Leviticus 23 and Numbers 28 to 29. Learn his feast and start keeping his feast. Then, bear in mind that today we are mainly using money and no longer burning agricultural offerings. Additionally, Yahushai, yes, that's his name, is not Jesus. His name is Yahushai. Yahushai is the first of the first fruits. We see this in Leviticus 23 verse 10 to 14. Through Yahushai we shall all be saved. Brothers and sisters, you see in Daniel 12 verse 11, it shows that the daily sacrifice will be taken away. This is already done. We're not burning the daily sacrifices anymore. While verse 4 highlights that knowledge will increase. Brothers and sisters, this is happening now. Now go to Matthew 24 verse 11. It states that many false prophets shall deceive many. These are the despicable false preachers that are deceiving many and taking their money. Brothers and sisters, your knowledge is increasing. So stop being used by these false prophets. It is extremely difficult today to find a true apostle, much less a Levite. With that in mind, and considering the changes that are happening and those that have happened already, just do as you are told in the Bible. Give your feast offerings, whatever you are able to give, to who you can identify. Now today you can identify the fatherless and the widow easily. For the 3 feasts that requires traveling, which is the Passover and unleavened bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacle, just pray to the Father and ask Him to take you away from home for you to observe the feast. It's stated that we should observe them, the Feast of Tabernacles, in booths. So going to a hotel is quite acceptable in these times. While traveling or before traveling to your feast, make your offerings to the fatherless and the widow. In the 3rd year, pay your 10% tithes again to the fatherless and widow during your Feast of Weeks. Brothers and sisters, these are who we can identify today, the fatherless and the widow. Remember, this is 10% of your earnings from the month of the Feast of Tabernacle from year 2 to the month and day of Pentecost in year 3. Finally, remember to give to the poor as you are able continuously. This is different from the fatherless and widow offerings you make every year and the 10% tithes you make every 3 years. Brothers and sisters, there you have it. The truth about tithes and offerings in this modern era. I would like to leave you with a question I asked you earlier in the presentation. If you do not do what our Father Yahweh commands you to do, then why do you think you deserve to receive blessings from Yahweh, our Father and Creator? When you pray to Him, why should He answer your prayers when you're not doing what He tells you to do? This concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time. Our next presentation, Module 8, will highlight the truth about shaving or not shaving your head and beard. Please join us as we look forward to your company. And remember, if you have biblical questions of your own, please feel free to subscribe and ask your questions. We will make every effort to answer them in future discussions and presentations. Thank you.